¿Cómo va, gente? ¿Todo bien? Oh, ¿cómo va? ¿Todo bien? Pa, pa, pam. ¿Cómo va, gente? Aquí va. Hi, how are you? Hey, Marcelo, ¿cómo va, che? And we go in electro. Hey,
Hey,
how are you? Nice finally meeting you.
yeah, you too. How are you?
I'm great. I'm here. I just prepared myself a coffee.
Oh,
The idea is just to have a relaxed chat about music, about films, about movies. Um, yesterday. I read an interview and I discovered that you study mathematics, and that's very funny because a lot of friends that are musicians and they make music for films, they have this relationship with mathematics, programming, and computer. What do you think is that?
well, I think, one of the analogies I've heard over the course of my training was that music is our ability to hear mathematics. So I think they're really just one and the same, vibrations and frequencies are fractions, they're ratios, and that's just us hearing it. So I went to school for music theory, and a lot of the music theory is pretty much intertwined with mathematics in general. So it probably taps into a similar part of the brain, I suppose.
Hmm. And but let's start from the beginning. You were
Sure.
little. How this passion for music where starts at what age?
Sure, pretty young. So I started studying music when I was four. There was a piano in the house, and my older brother was a really great piano player. So I wanted to be like my brother, I suppose, or maybe just because my parents always had music going. The same way I think a lot of people get into it, just being exposed at a young age. And so I was very lucky that my parents really valued music education. So started when I was fairly young, started with piano lessons, and then did all of the um, auxiliary instruments you get as a kid. Like, in school you get recorder, and then you start moving on to real instruments. I was like guitar and saxophone and marimba, and eventually I got more into music theory and composition, and the rest is kind of history there.
Hmm. What were your parents? They were musicians too, or there were any artists in the family to guide you?
No, not really. My parents were not musical at all, and I think maybe that's part of the reason they really wanted myself and my brother also to study music, was because they didn't necessarily have that, and they wanted us to have it. My brother is a pretty good musician. He went to school and worked professionally as well. So, it some people say it skips a generation. I think it's probably more so just based on education. I think everybody could really be a musician. It's just whatever your education is really. If you have the opportunity to, and that's where your passion is, you'll probably become a musician.
Uh, and what was your childhood hero regarding music? Who would
Sure.
you admire?
Yeah, so I really liked classical music growing up. I wasn't as into film scoring as I am today, and my favorite kind of music was Renaissance music and Baroque music. I really like counterpoint. I have this producer name I use, Electropoint, and it comes because I really like counterpoint. And I was doing a lot of electronic music, and it always had counterpoint in it. So my musical heroes were the great masters of counterpoint, really.
Hmm. No, that's funny because the other day I was talking to musicians, and when you ask filmmakers what are the famous musicians, they usually say names like John Williams, Hans Zimmer. But if you ask a musician, he say, no, 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 no. I'm with the real musicians. Is that something that happened a lot?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I really do. There are amazing film composers that I love. But when I was a child, it was, less of that and more of the classical music. And I would say, honestly, I get asked to make less classical music than I do, scores that sound like Hans Zimmer, for example, just because that's where people's frame of reference is. So I love stuff like that, but um, it's just one part of what we actually get asked to do when writing music.
So you talk about the ancient musician, the different school, the classical, the romanticism. Which one of the schools do you think you receive the most influence? Because romanticism that starts in an early with Beethoven, and then progress. Then we have the modern ones. So which for you, or you also have different stage in your education? Like, okay, now I'm more like this, or more like.
Sure. Yeah, I think my biggest influence, like I was saying, was earlier music. But I really do like romanticism. I mean, it's made not this most recent movie I worked on, but the movie before it was very romantic, and it kind of pulled on that stuff. But it's funny, almost very few of the things that you do in film scoring are actually authentic, right? So like if I do something romantic, it doesn't really fit the style of the era entirely always, because you have to adhere to what the film is doing. You're kind of developing a new language, so it's not authentic in that sense, but you're kind of drawing on that history of romanticism or classical or Baroque, but it's never, vanilla, if you will.
No, I was reading an article about music theory that said that romanticism break all the rules, right? And there's always it's like one school that they have strict rules, and then there's another one that are breaking. In which era are we now? And what do you think about the idea of having rules and learn to break them?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Particularly that second part I really like. So I'd say, to answer it in order, we're in an era that we won't be able to define until we're out of it. So like romanticism, Baroque era, all of those things are generally names and nomenclature that's given with a historical lens. So you could look back on a time and say, there was an overarching trend, and now let's put a title on it. Sometimes people were self-proclaiming a certain genre, but I think it's a little bit harder at the moment to give a definition, because there's more music being made daily in current times than there were in the entire decades in the past. Everybody has access. So that's the first part. The second part about breaking rules. I mean, as I was saying, I have like a music theory background, music history, a training, a classical training, if you will. And what I liked about that was that you can be aware of breaking rules. So I don't really think that people are always breaking rules. Sometimes they're just not aware of said rule, if you will. And it's like the same thing with filmmakers, directors. The more educated they are in their craft, the more likely they are to break a rule for a reason, as opposed to they just didn't know that there was a convention that they're going against. So in that sense, I always think art education is really important, so that you can do something new and unique because you know what's been done previously.
Yeah, actually, when with writers, it's the same. A friend of mine is a writer, and he said you have to learn the rules first, and then learn how to break them. Because, and this, in the sense, you can see a difference between, for example, a musician that or a film director that has a formal education, and then they say, okay, now I'm going to do my own stuff, right? Or look for mentors outside the institution. You have a lot of famous mentors. Which one do you think, or I think a better question would be, which was the most important lesson that each of them teach you along your education, formal and informal, because I know there's a lot of informal information.
Sure, sure. That's also a great question. It's a big one. So I think in my formal education, um, uh, it's a tough one. It's really a toss-up. One of the best lessons I got was from a guidance counselor who told me that you couldn't make a living in music, and it was kind of the opposite effect on me, you know. And I'm sure a lot of people who are creatives have this kind of drive that gets fueled when somebody tells them they can't do it, and they get really maybe it's stubbornness, I'm not sure, but it was a really great lesson to have a little bit of resistance early on in my musical career, because it kind of pushes you to prove that you can do it. And then I think in my professional career, once I was already in the field and making a living, some of the best advice I got from someone was a composer I really loved. He wrote a lot of the music for like news jingles and things like that. So not like, the most necessarily artistic or PR forward type of music. He was writing music for very functional stuff, and he told me that life will be a lot easier if you just remember it's not yours. So the point there was just to remember I'm writing music or making music or editing music or revising music for other people, and as long as I was okay with doing that, I would never be too sensitive, and you'd be able to work another day without taking anything personally. So those two things really have stuck with me, because they're more about the part of what I do that is based on being a professional or having drive, rather than what chord progression to use or how to write for violins. All of that can be learned, through books and things. But this information came from, either resistance or support from individuals.
Mm. Well, you can learn from everyone. That's the whole point, right? Even the people that tell you, well, actually, a lot of friends that are filmmakers, they have the same experience in the university. The teachers tend to be harsh, and they say you're going to starve to death if you do this. Yeah, I'm sure that similar things happen in the music, schools. The other day, well, now we are doing a lot of short films with different genres. We have always this discussion between, the producers, directors, and the composers about how to express emotion through music, and how to translate, for example, a literature, genre. Like, let's take horror, because I saw you do in your YouTube channel. You have a lot of tutorials about horror. It's our favorite genre. But within horror, you find subgenres, and there's two I'm interested in. The Gothic one, the Gothic music, it could be defined as dark romanticism. I don't know if you agree with this. And the cosmic horror, Lovecraft, that is about atmosphere. And the interesting thing is, how do you express? Because the Gothic is about the past, Jerry, ghost in a house, sadness. But because I've been listening to a lot of cosmic horror music, Lovecraft, and it's about you are nothing, existence, you are a tiny thing in the universe. How can you express that with music? Because I when I talking to composers, I want to express this emotion. So how can we translate that into a composer language? So they
Sure. Yeah. No, so there's a lot of, I don't want to get too technical, because, I'm not going to get into which specific harmonies that you're using, but the answer is pretty much the rudiments and how you use them. So when what I love is when a director treats you like an actor. So you say, I want it to feel like sad, right? And as opposed to telling me, use these instruments and I think it'll do that. You just give me the direction as to where you'd like to go emotionally. So say they say, I want it to be existential. You're very. So to me, existential. All of a sudden, I start thinking, what are the harmonies and textures that could do that? And so the harmonies are very apparent to me. They're generally, and I am going to get kind of technical, but they are like these sus chords. So open harmonies with suspended non-chord tones in them. And you're going to do it on rather textural instruments. So things that are very long and evolving for the most part. So a lot of reverb on those things, or if it's violins, you're going to want to be doing them with some extended playing techniques that are very scratchy and just kind of have a lot of texture to them. And what you're doing there, because it's existential, is you're getting rid of the very definiteness that exists in melody. And so it's that texture that creates that feeling of ambience and where am I? What does it all mean? And then it's okay if you do have melodies coming in, but again, they generally be more drenched in reverb and ambient to give that kind of thing. And then for the gothic horror stuff, I think it's very important, again, like the discussion we had earlier about knowing your music history and your rudiments. So I would look to some of that romantic music that was written probably later Romanticism, early modernism, and then mess it up and make something about it uneasy. And so in the horror genre, there's like two things that really stick out, and that is dissonance as the primary direction of the harmony and the melody, and then also noise. So white noises, or essentially anything that reminds you of a scream, because that's like the human version of noise. If you can emulate that musically, you're probably going to hit that point where people are uncomfortable listening. But I've done some horror stuff that's completely the opposite, where, something is really, really disturbing on screen, and the music is really beautiful. And it's that kind of dichotomy of the picture and the music that actually makes people uncomfortable. So yeah, that was a pretty long answer, I think, but hopefully I touched on a few of the things that I might try to carry out when someone wants me to write something scary or unnerving.
Actually, I invite a lot of composers from Latin America, so you can
Oh,
be
cool.
specific, because they really are looking forward to hear you
Oh,
speak
cool.
about all this.
Yeah,
No,
sure.
I thought about, for example, Silent Hill, the video game,
Mm-hmm.
the piano, theme. It mixes both. It has element of, it's a piano like gothic, kind of sad, because it's all about the story, about this, the story that happens in the town in Silent Hill. But at the same time, this cosmic horror element that is defined with the emptiness. And that's another question of our composer. How can you feel someone empty, void of existence? Like, how can you do that technically?
Sure. So, okay, cool. Well, I didn't realize there would be people who would get the theory. To do that empty, there's a lot of it is in that textural stuff. So a lot of people think composers are just writing the music down and then here's the chords, here's the harmony. But a lot of what you're doing is creating the textures. And so for that emptiness, a lot of it comes down to how you're modulating the sound. So if you have just a minor chord or, even a dyad, just two notes of it, it's the sound that you find that's a bit unnerving, and then modulating that sound throughout time. So I can play just an open fifth chord, but through modulating the different elements of its EQ or its attack or distortion on it, that kind of thing, you can create an entire piece of music that evokes a whole emotion there through the production techniques. And that's a big part of modern composition that is even more important than it was back in the classical days. I mean, orchestration was the early version of what I'm talking about, essentially. But now we're doing it a lot through mixing, using different types of plugins or different types of synthesizers to do that kind of thing. And I mean, to the point you're making about like a piano theme, in a lot of the horror music or the dark gothic stuff, again, because there's composers watching this, the real key is chromaticism. So generally, you tend to be doing modal mixture. So you'll be playing in a minor key, and then all of a sudden you're in the major key for a second, the parallel major key to it. And all of a sudden those little moves start to be like, where am I don't have a tonal center. And when you don't have a tonal center, you do feel very lost, and not in a good way. Generally, it's very unnerving. Like, everybody wants that fundamental tonal center to come back to, and if you don't give it to the listener, it's definitely, you're lost. So that's a technique that I think is pretty common in horror music.
What about your own invention, your own fingerprints in music? What would you consider your own style, or when it's about? Because I've been hearing a lot of your work in different genres, but there's always a footprint. What would you consider your footprint, your trademark?
Yeah, that's harder and harder to define. A lot of people want to have a what they call a compositional voice, right? And everybody thinks that they have one, and everybody also thinks that they don't have one. But in reality, it's somewhere in the middle, I think. I do a lot of different genres, so like this last film that's coming out next week, it's all synthwave music. It's all very poppy. And then the last film I did was all neo-romantic stuff. And I think probably the only thing that is related between the two of them is my sense of melody. I'd say my sense of harmony too is probably, it's the voice leading. It's that I find it particularly pleasing when one scale degree follows a different scale degree. So whenever I hit the fourth scale degree, I generally go to the third. And that's something that I always do because I studied counterpoint. So, it manifests itself in that way. But a lot of times I'm going against that, essentially, because, the director is asking me to do something that, for example, like you said, it could be unnerving, right? Or leave you feeling lost. So I wouldn't do what I normally would do. But in not doing what I normally do, I probably am being myself because I'm breaking the rule that I impose. So I don't know if that answered exactly what you're asking, what my voice is, but it's probably something deeper than I can actually put a finger on, and that most composers, but it's essentially a sensibility, if you will, and it extends beyond a specific genre.
Now, what about sci-fi? You have composed a lot of sci-fi. I've been looking of all your short films you have participated as a composer, and I tend to notice that, of course, you've done some comedy, some drama, but it's mostly sci-fi, horror, action. I love that genre, by the way. And besides music, have you read all this genre? Have you read books of authors about this genre to get some kind of parallel inspiration? I have a lot of composers that read books to try to inspire themselves. What are your methods? Have you read a lot of sci-fi horror authors?
No, not really. So a lot of times my main touchstone on a project is what the director has requested me to do. So I do read a lot. I tend to read more. This is probably an odd answer for somebody who's a creative, I guess you'd call all of us. I read more nonfiction than I do fiction. And the reason there is just I spend most of my days and nights doing fiction, right? Like, you're spending hours on scoring films, and it takes up most of your day. So at the end of it, I'm generally looking to the real world. If, nonfiction, history, physics, science, that kind of thing, just to think about something in the complete opposite way. Like, there's so much in there, and I tend to draw a lot of inspiration from the human condition, which I mean is the great part about sci-fi books and science fiction is really and all fiction in general, it's really well grounded in the human experience. But I get a lot of it in films, so I find myself gravitating towards nonfiction afterwards.
No, yes, of course. Actually, I have a very interesting talk with Phil Tippett. That's the FX specialist of Jurassic Park, Star Wars, and again, his education is very formal. He studied anthropology, psychology. He was more centered in. I mean, and that's I asked him what kind of music if he liked John Williams, blah, blah. He says, no, I prefer Beethoven. And I realized, yeah, no, I prefer the good ones. I mean, he's old, so he can do whatever, he can say whatever he wants now. So no, but the fun part is there is all this technical aspect. You say, I mean, I don't know if you watch his last film, Mad God. Mad God, he defined it as a mix of psychology, anthropology, and in a way, I think the process to make music for someone that has a formal education is something like that. You have to read non-fiction, but at the same time read different. That's why I ask you about, you study mathematics. Maybe you are studying psychology. I don't know if you read psychology books. What are the books you are always trying to find?
Yeah, I read a lot of manuals.
Oh,
This is probably maybe a weird antisocial behavior, but I really like reading dictionaries. So when I was a kid, I was always reading the music dictionary, and that's still something I read. I find it very, there's so much knowledge out there, so I'm always trying to read it. And like essentially, I want to read something that is a little bit like being in the Matrix, right? You want to download a new skill into your brain. And so I find myself gravitating towards, I read a lot of psychology, but I probably read more philosophy than I read psychology, albeit they're related, I suppose. Basically just looking for knowledge from the past to apply to my life. Life's short. You kind of want to learn from people who came before you and had time to think about it. So I read a lot of philosophy, a lot of science. Yeah, just all kinds of nonfiction. There's a great app called Blinkist. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
No. What's the name? Because so I can tell the composer. They ask me all the information. The manual. Well, and which manuals would you recommend? So our audience here.
Well, that's a different one. So Blinkist is an app that lets you get like 20-minute renditions of nonfiction books. So it's got nothing to do with composing. That's just like being aware of great books that are nonfiction. But the manuals, I mean, read the Oxford Dictionary of Music. If you read thousands of pages of the music dictionary, you're pretty much set as far as music manuals go. But I always love reading the manuals for all of the different music software that I get, or musical instruments that I get, like electronic instruments come with it and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. You can learn a lot from a manual,
And what you can learn with philosophers? What are you looking for in philosophy?
So there's two parts to that. One part is just how to live your life, nothing to do with music, but I think to be a good musician, you have to be a sensitive human. And that's kind of the real thing I'm looking for in philosophy is how to understand human emotions, the plight of people, what the human condition, every time I say human condition, I feel like, man, I wish I had a better word because I keep saying that. But that's really
What's
that?
Human soul.
Yeah, human soul.
Spirit.
Well, no, but I mean more than that. I don't just mean the soul. I mean the plight of human dealing with existential love lost, death, birth, all of these things that humans go through. And it's all of those different emotions that if I'm going to write a piece of music that's supposed to be for the birth, like I'm working on a film now, and the first scene is the birth of a child. How do you capture that without truly being in touch with like humanity and the different ways people can feel about that? I've never given birth, so I have to give an approximation of what that would be. And the more you read about people's experiences and how people deal with life and death and birth, it really informs your writing.
Mm. What kind of music do you enjoy the most nowadays? Do you listen to, for example, rock music or different genres in music?
Sure. So the answer there is depending on the day. It's very much a lot of times it's dependent on the film too, you know, because when I'm working on a film, like right now, the film I'm working on is a film for the Hmong people, which are a an ethnicity in Asia, and they have a very specific cultural background. It's not specific to one country, and the musical tradition there is very particular. So I've just been listening to lots of that, and it's my favorite music at the moment. Whereas a few months ago, I was working on the synthwave score, and all I listened to was synthwave music. And these are all things that come through, you know, your life because of other projects or because you know, this is what I do for a living. So all I do is listen to music. And it just depends on the project or the day, really. Yeah, but there's no mainstays, you know, there's nothing that like I listen to as my favorite always and forever. I try to keep listening to new things because I've gone through a stage when I was a kid, like I said, classical music or nothing. And I think that may have been helpful in my education, but not helpful to continue with that trend forever.
Yeah. And tell me something. Is there any music where it's for a film or another project that has something very personal? I mean, something you were, I don't know, having a particular moment in your life, you are feeling sad or happy, and that was expressed through the music, maybe by accident. What I mean, my question would be, what is your most personal work?
Sure, that's a great question, and maybe I'm going to give a cop-out answer, but every piece of music. So, and I really mean that because again, when somebody asks me to write a piece of music for a film, each scene I'm trying to be an actor, and I know that sounds like you know, like a manufactured answer, but I really mean it. And when I'm trying to be an actor, so if there's a sad scene, I think about the saddest thing that happened to me, and that's how I'm writing it. If somebody died, I think about when somebody in my life died, and what did that feel like when. You know, there's a fight. I think about when I've been in a fight and how that made me feel. You know, it's so honestly, every piece of music is very close to me emotionally. But to go back to what we said earlier about advice, the advice that I had was that you should certainly not be so attached to a piece of music that when somebody doesn't use it or wants to mute it or cuts it up or goes a different direction, that you don't take it personally. Because I've written a lot of very personal music, and then, you know, either the film didn't use the music or I had to revise it, and that's okay. It's more about, you know, channeling into those emotions and putting it out there as a musician. And if it's just right for the film, it's just right. If it's not, you'll be writing on another piece of another piece of the film later in the day, you know.
Mm. This is a question that a lot of composers ask me to ask you. What is the most common mistake that composers make when they are, you know, doing a soundtrack for a film or project?
Sure. I think man, well, honestly, there's a lot. And I've definitely done it too. The first thing is what I was saying. And that's why it's such good advice, which is thinking it's your music. And they get attached to the music. And so if somebody wants to change it or cut it, they fight it. And it's not about that. So the music you're writing for a film is not about you. It's not about your music. It's about the scene. It's about the movie. So if it gets cut, just be okay with that. And then the second thing I think most composers have the mistake is that when people are talking, particularly, but also other scenes, is do a little bit less. So everybody wants to show how good of a composer they are and write the busiest, and I do that too, of course. You know, I have a musical idea and I want to flesh it out entirely. But sometimes just a few perfect chords and a perfect melody is all you need. Sometimes when people are talking, you only just need a few perfect long notes, and it's about knowing where to put those that is actually the skill, not like how busy can you make it. You don't want to take away from the film.
Mm. I wanted to ask you about one of my favorite composers. It's Vangelis. I'm sure.
Sure.
Uh, what do you think about him, and what do you think as how can we define his specific trademark, because he's very specific, and I know he has inspired a lot of modern composer, young composers.
Sure. So, I mean, yeah, absolutely love it. I mean, it brought in the era of the modern electronic film score. So, you have to love that. I mean, that's a big part of what I do, which is combining synthetic elements with orchestral elements, and the synthetic elements. He made a lot of really great progress in that field, and yeah, I mean, what can I say? It's classic for a reason. I love all of his film scores. I mean, everybody seems to gravitate towards the most famous one, obviously, but a lot of really great stuff there. I mean, it's influenced lots of composers, and anytime a composer does that, although sometimes you have to thank the director. Like, let's not forget somebody approved that and wanted that for their film, right? So, not to take anything away from what he did, because he did that. That's awesome. But it's like a whole team, and so a lot of times when I'm listening to film composers, I tend to think I'm listening to like a collaborate. You're listening to collaboration with the director and the composer, and that all of those scores were great collaborations.
Mm. Is there any music or type of music or genre that would be very difficult for you now? Or I mean, that you consider, okay, I don't know if I can do this. What are your limits? I mean, right now, I mean.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, so my background before I got into doing a lot of feature films and television shows was I did commercials. So back in the day, people didn't use stock music the way that they use it now. And now everybody goes to these stock libraries, and everybody's commercials all sound the same. And so it's kind of a shame in that sense, right? Because it's kind of devaluing your own work by choosing that. And it's not what directors and editors like to have me say. So I apologize. And there's a place for it. So I understand it completely. There's a place for B-roll in a film, right? There's a place for stock music. I get it. Budgets, time constraints, totally cool. But the point was, I used to write a lot of that music directly for the commercial. And when you do commercials, the ad agency will ask you to do the craziest stuff. They'll be like, we need mariachi music with hip hop beats on it. We need, just all kinds of weird mishmashes of music. And so you had to learn to write that kind of music. So I got very comfortable in a lot of different genres and doing it very quickly. So one of my trademarks has been, I've done a lot of different styles. Like, this new film coming out, it's all, dance 80s music. And the last film that I did was all big neoclassical orchestral romantic. So I'm comfortable in most styles. I'd say the hardest style often to do is probably, stuff with vocals, because I did a lot of pop songs for a lot of artists, and it's still something that I do, but it requires a lot of logistics, and that is the problem. Because when you write something for a film, almost undoubtedly you're going to be making revisions, and as soon as you have more and more artists engaged in that process, it becomes more difficult. I wouldn't say it's impossible. I've done it on a number of films lately, and it's wonderful. I love it, but I would say it's the most time-consuming and concerning thing that I have to work on.
What's the music you compose can tell us about you, about yourself as a person?
Oh yeah, that I'm overly romantic. So I sometimes the biggest mistake that I make is sometimes I make certain scenes too pretty, too beautiful, and like that's not a good thing. I'd say I have to check myself, you know? And so I always lean into making something very heartfelt. And sometimes that's not needed. Sometimes it shouldn't be so emotional. And so I think what that tells you about me is maybe that, you know, I really value emotion and particularly romanticism. Like I love being in love. You know, that's the thing that brings me
Mm.
the most joy in life. And sometimes maybe I shouldn't lean into that so hard on a score. But the times when it does work, I think it's, uh, you know, I think it's because of that. So, you know,
Now we will pay attention to your songs. Oh, here is the this.
yeah, yeah.
Well, that's the idea of expressing your emotions. I mean, that's what the trademark it's all about. Yes, of course, if you are composing a drama, melodrama, horror, I don't know if it will work, but yeah. And and tell me, what was the moment in your life when you say, okay, I made it. I'm on the zone. I'm doing what I love. I mean, the moment you said, okay, now finally I'm here. And how that what that feel like? What did you feel like?
Sure. Well, I try to, you know, that's a great question. I can pinpoint a few projects that made me feel that way, but I try to feel that way every day. I mean, if you're not grateful that somebody is uh, commissioning you or paying you to write music, then you'll never really be satisfied anyway, right? So, like, I think the first time I had something on the radio, a song on the radio, it was a really big moment for me professionally because it was validifying that people would hear something. I didn't even care that it was good or it was bad. It was that people would hear it because it's very, very difficult as a musician to have people hear what you're doing. And the thing is, they would never know it was me because I write music for other people. So when you're doing songs for other people, the artist is who it is. You know, I'm just the producer and the songwriter and everything. So that kind of thing feels really good. But what really makes you feel good is every day you sit down to do it and you realize this is your job. And I try to start each day with that kind of gratitude, because those moments where you do feel really good, like you finally had something on like Netflix or HBO or something, that feels awesome, right? It feels really good, but it's not going to last. It doesn't mean anything in the scheme of your life. It's about the day in and day out and feeling good about that kind of stuff. So I'd say it's not particular moments. It's more just that every day I get to write music. Sometimes it's for better things, sometimes it's for worse things, but that's what I'm spending time doing.
Mm. If you would have to make the music for the film about a film about your life, what kind of music would you write?
Well, like I said, it would probably be overly romantic. You know, like me doing the dishes would be a very sad, heartbreaking song, you know? Um, yeah, pretty music. I really want to work on things that have a lot of beauty in them. That's what brings me the most joy. But at the same time, like you said, I do a lot of sci-fi and a lot of horror and a lot of comedy, and it's not always beautiful. But if I was going to write something for my own life, I think that's probably what I would lean into.
And what about the original story? If for example, I give you all the research, like, that have the, big industries like, I don't know, or that Vangelis has, the best director, best sound, everything, which is the story you would like to tell with your music?
Oh, like what would be the the best film or the best kind of
Yeah, story. You have to tell a story created by you.
oh,
What kind of story would it be? If you have one, maybe you have a story waiting to be told.
I don't. I think that's the really the beautiful part of what I do, which is that I think in music and emotion. And when somebody comes to me with the narrative, I can you know, heighten that, if you will. But I rarely have the full idea in my head. Um, I've thought about that for sure. Maybe when I stop making music, when I'm older, I could work on a story. But that's the great part about being collaborative, you know, is I get to work with people who that's all they think about. All they think about is that narrative and how to write that story, and then I can help enhance that. So I'm very lucky that I don't have to come up with the actual story always, because there's people much better at it.
Where, which other composers, maybe you know them, friend of you, you can recommend us to talk to listen, people that you admire, of course.
Yeah, so I try to stay away from naming people because of the reason that I think it's unfair to the people I don't name, because there are so many good composers. So what I would suggest people do are go to like Apple Music or Spotify if you're still okay with it. You know, there's a lot of Spotify issues going on right now. But go to some of those playlists and go to a film or a soundtrack playlist and listen to those people. That's how you should do it. I don't want to give advice on who I like and everything because I do know some of them personally, and I wouldn't want to leave them out. And I don't know others personally. I wouldn't want to, you know, that's just like a thing that I do to keep myself in check.
Okay. No, no. I always try to ask. So you can mention one and say, okay, this one it's a random choice, just to people. Just we can talk to him later and
Sure.
explore. But one,
Yeah,
if
I
it's
would.
okay for
Yeah, I would say look at the playlists because I want to be careful. But and then you know I like to look back at some of the people who are no longer with us because then I'm not really gonna you know, like I've been listening to a lot of John Barry lately. That's really good stuff. If, you know, so that would be my one recommendation for the moment because there was a new book that just came out about John Barry's music. It's really great. But yeah, listen to the playlists and just see what's going on right now because you'd be surprised how many of those composers aren't as famous as Hans Zimmer, for example, and they're doing really great stuff and they're less focused on you know, maybe doing the publicity, but their scores are really, really great. So I would check it out from that way. You know, just go listen to the music, see what you're into, or find your favorite film and then where you don't even remember the music. Because if you don't remember the music, I bet, but you loved the film, I bet you the music was really, really, really good.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, in one of your interviews, well, I quote your phrase when you said that sometimes you know the performance are not so good, the script writing is not so good, but you can fix all that with music, and that's true. I mean, music can save a movie sometimes. Well, not always, but it has a. Have you considered that you have saved some films or short film with your music?
I'd like
Don't
to,
mention which, but
yeah, yeah. Again, I won't really say which, but I'd like to think I've enhanced some moments. You know, certainly, yeah,
yes. No, it happens a lot. I mean, really, I've seen terrible performance being saved or hidden in some cases with, you know, very talented, you know, composers. I was talking about the sci-fi genre. Nowadays, you know, cyberpunk has caught on, though cyberpunk actually is a very anarchy, how you say, very critical, how you say when something is very sociological genre. But now he has caught on because the 80s is you know it's now everyone loves the 80s for some reason, except people who live the 80s. But what about I really enjoy sci-fi music, but sometimes I find myself hearing the same music, the same resource overuse. How can you approach the sci-fi genre from an original standpoint? Which would be your, from a technical point, that because that's a question for the composers. For a technical point, how can you do a good emotive, emotional cyberpunk music?
sure. I think the answer lies in not listening to that kind of music. So you're asking me what film scores to listen to, and I listen to them, but I try to listen to less film scores than I do other music, because you're essentially going to be leaning into the same things that have been done. It's very important to be aware of them, because sometimes, and let me just clarify one thing, which is that sometimes that's what the director wants, and there's no sense in you fighting it. So the director may say, I want this kind of score, and then that's your job to give them that kind of score. It's not your job to like go out and find a new voice for it, because that's not what they want. They want to lean into that style so they can do something with it. So it's not always about reinventing it. It's about having the perfect type of music coming in at the perfect time, but not reinventing the wheel. Other times, when you do have that freedom and they say, I want something that's never been done for this genre, then it becomes a much harder thing to figure out. And the answer usually lies in, again, having a more well-rounded experience where you don't, like you asked me, do I read a lot of sci-fi? I don't, but I've scored a lot of sci-fi things, and I don't think they sound like other sci-fi things, because I specifically work outside of that genre. And I would actually say I've been very lucky that no two projects I've done, except maybe a few television or serial things that I've done, have been the same genre. So like I said, this new one I have coming out is a sci-fi rom-com. I've never done that before. I've done rom-coms, I've done sci-fi. This is totally new. The last film I did was a gangster film. The film before I did that was a psychological drama. I've been very lucky to change course, and I think that keeps it fresh. I think if I kept doing the same genre over and over again, I might keep writing similar things. So, that's really not a good answer as to how you can break it out. Just try not to get stuck in a loop, essentially.
Mm. How would you like to be remembered?
Oh, musically or in life?
Both.
That's a great question. I mean, I think kind would be the answer. I mean, on most of my projects, it's really not about how good my music is. It's really about, the working relationship. And I think that's true. Anybody working in a collaborative art form, if you will, there's an expectation that what you're going to provide is of a high level already. And then after that, it's really the personal element. So I'd like to be remembered as a kind person. And then it doesn't really matter, anything else kind of falls into place, I think.
And musically speaking, as a composer, what
Yeah,
are the scores
yeah.
here?
I think musically, I would want to be remembered as emotional. Like like I was saying, whether it be sad or beautiful or uh, aggressive, in whatever it is, I want the emotion to be apparent in what I've written.
Hmm. No, actually, you mentioned about the emotion. There's a film I always recommend with a lot of people. It's on Amazon. You can watch it. There actually are two films, Nocturna Side A and Side B. There are four different composers, and a lot of people have cried a lot. And it's because of the music. It's clearly, and there has been some people criticize that. They say, okay, they're using music to get you emotional. It's not only that. It's the actor is 92 years old. It's one of the best Argentinian actors. He gives the performance of his life, and he's 92 years old. So you can imagine. It's very strong. A lot of I mean, it's an amazing story. It's a fantastic drama with elements of gothic horror. It's amazing. Side A and Side B. Side A is the point of view of the old man and his wife, and Side B is it's a experimental film from the point of view of the ghost that they hunt the same. So you can see it's amazing, and there are four composers there, and that's the thing. I mean, a lot of people complain about that, saying, "Oh, the music is too sad," and but I think it's wonderful because of that. What do you think about that kind of commentary? Like, say, "Oh no, the music it makes the scene terribly sad, and I cry all the time."
I think it's great. I mean, I think the fact that it elicited a response is actually what's great. So to me, that's what makes it so wonderful. Like, you know, people are certainly entitled to dislike it. And I think it's the beauty that it was so compelling that some people loved it, some people disliked it. The worst thing that you can ever get feedback is, oh, that's okay. You know, oh, that's fine, right? You're not really going anywhere artistically. And so I kind of expect that some people will really dislike something that I do and other people will love it. That's just being an artist of any kind. You know, you put yourself on the line. And I think what you're saying, if people reacted so intensely to that, it must be a great film. Not for everybody, but you know, I love some really bad movies because they really leaned into it. You know.
Yeah, you can watch it on Amazon. I wanted to ask you that your opinion about this film, because the four composer asked me to ask you this,
Sure.
if you can watch the film, because they're two different, very different music. One, it's really maybe classical, more music, and the second one mix kind of a synthesizer with also, I mean, because it's about the ghost realm. It's and the first film is it has been made with digital camera, and the other one with with an old camera. So
Oh, cool.
to represent those worlds, no, it's amazing. But yeah, the composer asked me, please it's now on Amazon, so you can then, if you want, tell me.
Yeah, I'll check it out. If you can DM me the name so I don't forget.
Yeah, I will. They will be very happy. So, well, thank you very much for this lovely chat. And
Sure.
if you, again, if we would like also to keep talking with different composers to ask their opinion. I learned a lot about, because I study economics now. I'm producing films, and I'm learning every day different things about music. I mean, I had to learn a lot about the music to be because a lot of the questions they asked me to ask you were very technical. So now I know the little. I hope I can learn more, because it's really beautiful when you can talk with a composer. I have the experience as a director. Say, oh, I want to feel this, and as you said yourself, it's a collaboration, right?
Yeah.
And I'm directing the composer as an actor, like saying, okay, I want to feel like this, like intensity, and well, that's the idea. And of course, if the pandemic is over someday, I hope it does. We are always trying to connect people from different parts of the world. We are talking with composers in Germany, Latin America, and also in some point we would like to join us in some Zoom with other composers, so we can have like a debate. And you can meet. I don't know if you know people around the world, other composers, or you would like to meet them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great community, and honestly, we don't really hang out that much because most of us are stuck away in our studios writing music for other people. We don't really hang out too much. There's a few, I'm in Los Angeles. There's a few like societies and guilds and that kind of thing, and occasionally there'll be a cocktail party or an award ceremony or something, but then that's it. We don't really hang out because we're all fighting for the same jobs. And then once we have them, we sit in our rooms and we make music. So yeah, no, I love meeting other composers.
Yeah, I spoke with a lot of producers, directors, actors from LA, and it's what they tell me. It's a very busy life. You're working all the time, because when you don't work, you have nothing to do. I mean, or you go to a wild party, or you just stay home. So I have a lot of people ask me, I mean, please, if you do some Zoom or we organize this live with 4 people, invite me, because, I mean, they need to do, I mean, the cocktail parties, it's more like a, social, how you say, PR activity more than, hanging around. And in Latin America, we are very hangout culture. So we have the Sundays with coffee or mate. So, well, I will let you know, please. We're organizing, by the way, I don't know if you know, a horror short festival on April. It's international. It's going to be
cool.
everywhere. So also we can do something with you and some. Let me check with some composers so you can meet.
Sure.
Can I introduce them so you can talk to them, because a lot of people have asked me that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And well, let's keep in touch. And please, people, you have a YouTube channel. You can all your work is on Spotify, right? So people can.
Yeah, Spotify, Apple Music. If you just, I mean, honestly, the easiest way to find my stuff is to go to my website. So
Oh,
it's romanmolino.dunn.com, and I keep that up to date the most because YouTube is always changing. They do shorts now and long form, so you know it's always. And I'm not as active there. I'm mostly active on Instagram, you know, because I like connecting with people. YouTube is a little less people oriented.
yeah.
But because social media is always getting different, I keep everything on my website. You know, you can find my socials there, IMDb, Spotify, Apple Music, all of that stuff is there.
Excellent. Well, guys, you know, go to the Roman website to hear the new music. And well, thank you very much. Well, see you around.
All
Bye,
right. Thanks so
people.
much for
Thank you.
having me. All right.
No,
Bye
you're
bye.
welcome. It was a real pleasure for me.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.